Okay, so transport in the time of COVID-19, 15th of February update. I'm Dr. Robert Davis, I'm chair of the Road Danger Reduction Forum, and I've been doing the news updates here since COVID and the associated changes in the transport scene. You can send me material at that address or go to our website and you can pick up previous slides, which I've now downloaded or uploaded, I should say. Right, I'm just flashing that up from last week. That's the Who Kills Whom way of measuring, which has been advocated by Road Danger Reduction Forum for 30 years. We got some support from PACTS, and it now goes on to Department for Transport as some of the figures which they use, some of the metrics, and it's been used now by Transport Scotland. Something else from last week, the debate about road pricing. It's not going to go away, but doesn't seem to be actually moving forward. The first report on road pricing came out in 1964, and it doesn't seem to be about to happen apart from congestion charge in central London. Right, this is a nice little graphic I thought I'd show you. Transport, energy and population density. Very low density with loads of transport energy expended in Atlanta. And then you go to the, you go down to less energy expenditure, and it's associated with higher urban density. Now, this is a new report from CREDS, and this is a must read, Curbing Excess High Energy Consumption and the Fair Energy Transition. And that's the percentage of car miles against percentage of population. So you can see that up to about 50% of car miles is done by just under 20% of the population. And that's explained in the report. It says car use varies significantly by income. 2018, the people in the lowest decile drove an average of just under 4,000 kilometers per person per year by car, and people in the richest decile drove 7.3 thousand kilometers. 11% of the UK population accounts for nearly 44% of the total car mileage, and the top 5% drivers cover nearly 30,000 miles per person per year. The high mileage travellers are disproportionately concentrated in richer households, and previous research suggests that 20% of the population, mainly from affluent households, are responsible for nearly 60% of local transport emissions. So do have a look at that report. That's done by people like Gillian and Hannibal and the other people at CREDS. Very important to read. And that's still got the highway code stuff. What's new here is a video about what the changes mean, done by Peter Walker in The Guardian, along with all these other things which I've referred you to. Don't forget the very nice piece done by Michael Hutchinson in Cycling Weekly. I'll put that up when it goes online. And there's the graphic. Again, I put that up last week. Right, now there are a lot of things to read. Okay, CPRE, Council for Preservation of Rural England in London section, have done a report on London boroughs must take more action on parking. Do read it. I'll refer to that a bit later. Now, also what's new is Wales Roads Review initial panel report. The Welsh Road Review panel, chaired by Lynn Sloman, published last week, is, according to Phil Goodwin, it's an important step in Welsh and British transport planning, testing old road proposals against new policies and problems. Must read. And he goes further into that in today's LTT. Basically, they are not pushing for more roads. So this is a big, important step. And I think Chris will say something about that later. Big bit of European research by Professor Greg Marston there. I mentioned Luke, The Last Lot Not Lost in London. Here's that highway code video, which is new, and a piece on the radio by Tom Standage. Also new next week is an Impact of Play Streets webinar. I think Chris Boardman's speaking on that. Interesting little article by Donald McCarthy, who you probably have come across, saying how can we hope to hit net zero targets when cyclophobia is rampant in the UK. Nice new article by the Active Travel Academy people. It's a report of how you get media reporting of fatal road traffic collisions. Here, a very nice little article by Cory Doctorow about Uber. Now, you may think, you know, we're not really interested in Uber, but they have been part of the transport scene, and a lot has rested on what they've promised to do. And he's arguing that the whole model is unsustainable and everything's going to fall to pieces. And it's really worth a read on that. Another new piece is about SUVs by Professor Adrian Davis. It's part of the essential evidence set of PDFs which come out from him, and they cover a variety of issues and problems to do with active travel. Do go to that and see previous examples. You can sign up for a newsletter and get all the new pieces of essential evidence. Also new article on e-scooters in the Times, not very sympathetic. I mentioned last week the report in The Guardian about the new report from Transport for New Homes, and you really must read their report. That's new. Transport for New Homes, talking about locking in car dependency in new developments. So there's a lot of must read there. And Cycle City, Active City, call for papers. Okay, in the UK, opposition to the Cowley LTN, I think I mentioned that last week, and also pausing of Clean Air Zone in Manchester, and Leicester plans for workplace parking levy. Now, this is a nice article from York about campaigners being upset about plans for the Acombe Road cycle route have been messed about with. And what I liked about it is that word there, fury. And normally it's only fury when motorists are upset about something. So it's good to see that now cyclists are allowed to be furious. And a call from Newcastle City Council on calls to improve air quality outside homes and schools. I don't know what they're actually doing. Maybe Sally or someone else can tell us at the end. Right, this is a very interesting illustration. This is a bid from Hampshire, which has just gone in. And it really is as if LTN 120 had never been written. There you've got appalling shared use, which we were already talking about as being at the bottom of the hierarchy under the previous guidance. And now we're really not supposed to be doing shared use. And look at that, there's a massive great hatching there. So there's plenty of space for a cycle lane, curb separated. Okay, so this is something that Active Travel England really needs to jump on. This is from Bolton, near the Chorley New Road cycle lane, which I think has been taken out. They're saying, why not walk or cycle? And some wit has said, probably because we removed the cycle lane. So bit of guerrilla activity there. Edinburgh, Leith Walk, we've mentioned before the slaloming, and now apparently people are leaving their cars in the cycle lane. I don't know what Mark Strong has got to tell us about UK capability funding. Mark, can you tell us if there's anything new? Mark?
He's on the phone, Bob.
All right. Okay.
Breathing later.
Okay. In London, yeah, there's the managed decline. Everything's up in limbo in Transport for London. Westminster, good news, they're keeping pop-up cycle lanes. They're also, I think they're keeping the advisories which they put in, which weren't according to LTN 120 guidance, but I don't know what's happening there. Interesting article in the Evening Standard with people in Greenwich saying that they really want to keep their low traffic neighborhood. So that's a nice bit of thing to read. And there's consultation on one of the LTNs in Lambeth. It is really important, everybody, to keep an eye on all the consultations that are going on, because unless you say, yes, we like it, we want more, this was good, then you're not going to keep the good stuff. Right, this is that CPRE London report. They're calling on London boroughs to reassess their parking policy, and they've launched a parking policy benchmark assessment tool. And I have to say, I haven't actually read through what that is and how it works, but they've gone right in there saying we want councils to introduce more parking controls in front garden parking, reduce space given to parking, and replace. It does say parking an awful lot of times, and replace parking spaces with parks, play areas, wider pavements, bus cycle lanes, bike storage, parklets, rain gardens, trees, and EV charging. And here's actually a chart of the proportion of roads in boroughs that are under controlled parking zones, with you know, the ones with the highest proportions being in inner London, and that's what happens as you go into outer London. So they're arguing for more controls on car parking, and that's good. So do read that report. February the 26th, demonstration about the Silvertown Tunnel. And finally, in the advertising section, this guy, Klaus Steck, who did a lot of anti-car adverts, there's an article about him, and that says apparently, excuse my lack of German, this model performs particularly well in traffic jams.
After I'd been tipped off by Becky Reynolds of Cycling UK, our local rep, she let me know that on the 29th of January, the day I think the highway code, the new guidelines were coming in, that the BBC News throughout the Today programme had some errors in it. There was an item about the highway code. Ironically, it followed immediately after an item about COVID misinformation spread on Spotify by Josh Rogan. And what it actually did, the BBC, the next item, misrepresented the highway code for cyclists. It repeated the thing that had been in the Times, saying that cyclists are being advised to ride in the middle of the road. So I checked it out and I listened to it and I captured it. I dropped the file in the message somehow. I wonder if I can drop it in here. Does that go to everybody? Yes. And sure enough, that's what the newsreader said, not only at 9 o'clock, but also at 9:30 and I believe at 8:30 as well. So I went to the BBC website and found the complaints form. I'll give you the link to that as well. Hang on a second. That goes in here. And made a complaint saying no, Rule 72 doesn't say you should cycle in the middle of the road. As we all know, you should cycle in the centre of your lane, and only in 3 circumstances, I think Rule 72 says. It took them how long? About 10 days to come back with their response, and their response said, yes, they're sorry for not getting their radio news bulletin quite right, as they say, about cyclist road placement. We said that the code now advises cyclists to travel in the middle of the road instead of cyclists to travel in the middle of their lane. Actually, it doesn't say in the middle of the lane, in the centre of the lane. So they introduced an error there. So I've complained to them about introducing yet another error. We'll see whether they publish their apology and their correction on their website. Every 2 weeks they publish their recent complaints and responses. So it's not up there yet, but in case you find other things that they're misrepresenting cyclists and active travel about, it is worth dropping them a line, and hopefully they'll stop doing it and not misrepresenting active travel in any way.
No, there's no news on capability funding, but I really urge, if anyone is in those patches that we talked about, that they really do an FOI. It was really, really helpful.
In breaking news, I know it is London, but very close to my heart, Kew Road, which leads directly across Kew Bridge towards Richmond, had a temporary cycle lane put in months ago, which is extraordinary because it always used to be free parking for people who were visiting Kew Gardens and coaches. So when you cycled along it, it meant pushing you right out into the middle of the road. I thought Richmond Council were incredibly brave to put it in. They did, and moved all the parking away, and their biggest problem is what they do with the coaches, although they do have a coach park. Anyway, news off the press is that last night at Richmond Active Travel and Transport meeting, they've agreed that it will not only stay, but they're going to do some improvements coming north towards Kew Bridge. So as you know, Kew Bridge is very close to our heart, but it's really, really exciting because it's Lib Dem Council. The lead councillor for transport, Alexander Amon, who I always big up on Twitter, has done great work there, and it's fantastic news. So it can happen, and it is really, really exciting. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me along today. My name's Chris Todd. I'm founder and director of TAN, Transport Action Network. Just to give you a very brief history, I set it up in July 2019. I used to be sort of local support worker for Campaign for Better Transport for local transport groups around the country. But with their new chief executive at the time, they cut all ties with local groups and stopped providing any support. So there was no NGO providing support around the country. So I wanted to make sure that gap, that there wasn't a gap opening up and people being left without any support whatsoever, because none of the other NGOs were really working on transport at that level. In January 2020, Rebecca Lush, some people might know her from Twyford days, very experienced roads campaigner, joined. And then my focus, or the focus which had been about trying to support local groups around bus cuts, road issues and other schemes, has been sort of hijacked really by our legal cases. In March 2020, when the roads programme, that's the second roads programme for the strategic roads network as opposed to local roads, was published by Rishi Sunak. Well, he launched it at the March budget. But just before that, we wrote to Grant Shapps calling on to reconsider the roads investment strategy and to review the NNMPS, is the National Network's National Policy Statement, which is the policy statement that gives the policy for roads and rail. So it's used to determine planning applications for the strategic roads network. And then, without getting a sensible response from Grant Shapps, we decided to launch legal action on the roads programme because of the lack of consideration around climate change. Then, while all that was going on, because legal processes take forever, and the DFT was being particularly obstructive, we launched first of 3 legal challenges against the National Network's National Policy Statement, i.e. the policy, as opposed to the actual programme and programme of schemes. And that one was after we'd been told that Grant Shapps would consider reviewing the National Policy Statement because it's so out of date. It's from 2014, so it's pre-Paris, pre-net zero, pre a lot of changes around air pollution and various other things. Anyway, he reconsidered and then refused. The DFT forgot, in inverted commas, to tell us about the decision for at least 2 weeks. And then when they did, they refused to release any information, and only did so the day before we had to submit a challenge. Then in February 2022, I will come and get through the actual different legal challenges in a minute. This month, basically, Paola Renzel has joined us, and she's working in Wales to really provide support and positive messaging around the Welsh Roads Review. There's, I think, a real concern that there needs to be sort of a concerted effort to support what Wales is doing, to sort of big it up, if you like, to say that it should be the norm, to make sure that they don't sort of get pushed backwards by what undoubtedly there will be some negative reaction, and to try and make it more of a the natural thing to do, so that we can try and put more pressure and get more politicians in England thinking about, actually, well, we need an English roads review. You know, both of the devolved governments, Scotland and Wales, are looking at curtailing car use, which is very positive. And it would be a really retrograde step if that was allowed to go back. So we've just employed Paola on a short-term contract to sort of help support that. And then we're also looking this month to help with, get some help with comms, because we are becoming overloaded with the amount of work that we're doing around roads, but also now around buses. So very quickly through the Road Investment Strategy 2 challenge. It was in July, year and a half ago now, that we got permission on the climate change grounds to challenge this. In the autumn, we had the DFT was objecting to our witness statements. So that was from Professor Phil Goodwin and Gillian Annabel. And then we were refused permission to challenge it on air pollution and other grounds. Finally, in June 2021, well over a year since we'd first started, we got to court at the end of June, a week after the Stonehenge hearing, which we also were supporting, and it was heard by the same judge. Unfortunately, in July, he refused us permission, despite what he called a laconic briefing, i.e. the briefing was like a scribble on the back of a matchbox in terms of how they considered climate change, but that didn't matter apparently, as long as they had considered it. Interestingly enough, he did uphold or allow the Stonehenge judicial review. So he basically quashed the development consent order for the Stonehenge road through the World Heritage Site. So it wasn't a totally negative month. But unfortunately, we have now taken this to the end of the road. Well, certainly this part of the road, when we were refused permission for the to go to the Court of Appeal over this. So our challenge on RIS2 on climate change grounds has unfortunately come to an end. That's not the end of the road, though, for us. We have now just written to Grant Shapps asking him to reopen RIS2. I'm not sure at this stage what we will do with the response, but there is potential for, I suppose, a challenge on that if we don't feel that he is adequately considered the issues. But really just to highlight that legal challenges themselves are quite hard work. They don't necessarily deliver the end result that you want, because you have to challenge on a very narrow procedural basis, and not what you might think in terms of whether it's rational or, you know, the standards for rationality or irrationality are so high that it's almost impossible to bring a challenge on those sorts of grounds. So we wait to see what Grant Shapps will be saying about RIS2, but we've still got one challenge that is ongoing, and that's really on the national policy statement. Now that started off in July. We had to have a bit of a gap before we started that one after the roads one. And basically that's involved 7 pre-application letters on whether to review the national policy statement. And that was because of the Department of Transport being so obstructive. And part of the reason for that was that they had recommended to Grant Shapps that he should review the policy statement because it was so out of date, and he kept refusing. And as I said before, December 2020 was when we launched the challenge. The day after we actually received the information, which we were gagged, we couldn't actually publish it at all. We had to keep quiet about it. In March last year, so nearly a year ago, we launched a second challenge, basically because the first challenge, he then agreed to review his decision, which he'd only just done a few months ago. So that challenge was effectively paused. But then he decided again, against official advice, to not review the policy statement. So we had to launch a second challenge. And then, of course, in July, in a sense, we get a victory. Not that the courts necessarily saw that way, but we got a victory because the government then accepts that it has to review the national policy statement when it announced it in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. So after a lot of pushing and shoving, we got to where we should have been really a year or two ago. And then in last August, we launched a third challenge on this about his failure to suspend the policy while the review was going on. And the reason for that is because the policy has this ridiculous carbon test in it, which effectively allows them to ignore climate change as a consideration in planning, which in this day and age is an absolute nonsense. So we've challenged the failure to suspend the policy while the review is carrying out, because the review isn't due to report until 2023, by which time Grant Shapps will have hoped to have approved about another 20 road schemes. We were refused permission on this in December by the same judge who seems to have caused us a lot of problems throughout our legal challenges. And we have a renewal hearing on that. We are asking another judge to have a look at that and see whether we do have a case. That's on the 24th of February, so just over a week's time. And we're having a photo call outside the Royal Courts of Justice. So if anyone's around that lunchtime, around 12:30, please do come along and join us. We'll only be a brief there for half an hour or an hour or so. Our hearing is sometime that day. We don't know what time, but we thought we just needed to fix the time and on the day to have the photo. And we thought lunchtime was the most sensible. So just very quickly, a bit more interest. I mean, to me, government roads policy seems to be more of an ideology, almost a bit like a religion. It doesn't seem to be based on sound evidence or science. And it's sort of enacted in a bit like it has an impact a bit like the war on drugs. It comes up, consumes vast resources, is highly damaging, only has short-term benefits. That's the M25 for anyone who can't see the detail, and really achieves objectives. But yet still, we're, having more of it. Oh, I forgot to feed these ones in. So basically, just to give you an overview of the state of the current roads programme, I mean, despite legally having failed on the RIS2 challenge, we have significantly raised the profile of roads and their impact on climate change. So that a lot more people are talking about it, a lot more people are challenging the roads programme. That includes local groups as well as NGOs. And part of that has now led to the budget being cut from 27.4 billion to 24 billion. So small but significant step. And that's largely because of the opposition to Lower Thames Crossing and Stonehenge, which has significantly delayed both of those, which they're now more likely to be into RIS3, which is the next roads programme after 2025. In terms of how the rest of the RIS is going, RIS2 is going, Grant Shapps has approved 3 road schemes that were recommended for refusal. So he doesn't even like it when he's told that they shouldn't go ahead. 5 other schemes that he's currently trying to approve, he's delayed their decisions by at least 6 months. And I think he's tripping over legal obstacles around the environmental impact regulations and the failure to properly look at climate change impacts. And that seems to be one area which has caused some further delay. He's also paused for smart motorways, due to safety concerns, although pressing ahead with others even when they meet the criteria for being paused. And then in terms of what actually is going through normally, there are 5 schemes in examination and 2 more awaiting to have decisions. They're waiting for the examination reports from the planning inspectorate. And then there's another 7 schemes approaching planning. So there's a lot going on in the current roads programme, but equally there's a lot of delay as well. And as I said, some of that, or virtually all of that, is down to a lot of hard work by many local people. So RIS3 is the next roads programme, and already this is being consulted on, and the National Highways and the Department for Transport are now working on this. So some informal consultation has already happened. I mean, I've been along to a number of different things, but the one from the DFT was absolutely appalling. I don't know if anyone else has been to any of them, but it really was just a talk being talked at, and very badly answered questions. And it really just seems to be at this stage greenwashing of their intention to carry on building new roads. They're ignoring the science and public opinion. They make a great play about how they listen to public opinion and use that to determine what RIS3, and the public opinion comes through from Transport Focus, where the top priority, unsurprisingly, because it is every time, we want more on maintenance. And so their idea of more on maintenance is to put more into new build. But there is a formal public consultation that will happen later this year, so I really would urge a lot of people to get involved with that and to make sure that you have your say. We've already responded to elements. If people want to see what we have said and look for ideas, then all that information is on our website. And basically just keep in touch, keep active. As I said, 24th of February we're going to be at the High Court and Royal Courts of Justice. Come along if you can, be great. Look out for Grant Shapp's response to our call to reopen RIS2. We don't suspect that will come anytime soon. We will certainly publish it when we get it. Keep challenging the road schemes and support your local group if you have one in your neighbourhood. They do need all the support they can get and all the voices to be challenging the politicians for this, whether it's in the roads investment strategy or whether it's a local scheme, the pet project of your local authority, or whether it's coming with a new housing development. They all need challenging because they have impacts far greater than just creating more traffic. One thing that you can positively do, if a lot of local authorities have declared climate emergencies, a lot of them have set carbon reduction targets ahead of 2050. A lot have adopted 2030 targets, which are probably unrealistic, but challenging and worth encouraging people to try and do. But a lot of local authorities only focused on their internal operations. And if you can encourage local authorities to go for area-wide, i.e. the whole area that their local authority covers, budget / carbon reduction targets, that's much more useful and powerful, and is one of the things that is causing issues with road schemes, because the environmental regulations in the guidance, it says compare with local and regional budgets and targets. Now, if you haven't got any local regional budgets and targets, then they can get away with just comparing it to the national budget, at which point any scheme, however big it is always going to be pretty tiny compared to the overall UK budget. And that's how the government manages to dismiss carbon as an issue for new road schemes, because each individual scheme in themselves is minuscule compared to the overall carbon budget. But against a local budget, it will be very significant, and they wouldn't be able to get away with just missing it in the same way. And respond to the RIS3 consultation. That's, I think, we need to keep the messages going back that we don't want new road building, given the pressures that we're seeing from from buses and the loss of bus services already, and the threats for many more services, there's a really strong argument for switching the funding from RIS2 and RIS3, a lot of it anyway, into supporting carbon reduction transport measures, and that's got to be public transport and active travel. And engage with the National Networks National Policy Statement Review consultation. That's going through the process at the moment, and again push for, you know, better consideration of biodiversity, air pollution, noise pollution, etc., because they're not just reviewing the carbon element, they're reviewing the whole thing, because there's a lot of it that is out of date. And that's the end from me. Thanks very much for listening. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer.
This WebTag, I understand it's being looked at yesterday. They started looking at it again yesterday. Are you going to be playing a part in that at all, please?
Not directly. I think we haven't got the capacity, if I'm brutally honest. But we will be sort of liaising with people like Phil Goodwin, who will be looking at elements of WebTag. I mean, we've got the new carbon prices that have come out, and they are quite useful in terms of being used to reassess the business case for these new roads. So certainly for Stonehenge, for example, where National Highways are refusing to re-evaluate the business case because it's already terrible, it's already effectively negative, and using the new carbon figures in the TAG data book, which came out in November, would actually knock it even further negative. But other aspects of changes to WebTag, I'm afraid we just haven't got the capacity, but we will keep in touch with what's going on and informing people where it's useful.
Thank you.
Louise has got a hand up.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for that. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Where is the opposition on this? Why aren't Labour talking about it? It's not being covered in the press sufficiently, but where are the kind of opposition parties and why aren't they being more outspoken, given that in Wales the roads programme has been suspended and Scotland are considering the same? And also, who wants the roads programme? Who are the who are the MPs, besides Grant Shapps, which kind of MPs are really, you know, fighting for this and beginning to really criticise the Welsh decision? And yeah, that's all.
Okay, I'll try and remember everything. I mean, picking the last one up, in terms of in Wales, I think it's a question of waiting and seeing. I mean, at the moment, we've just had the initial report, which in a sense will flag up to people that their road scheme may be under threat. So they've just outlined the process, and they've given a list of 56 road schemes that they are reviewing. So as it stands at the moment, there isn't masses of opposition, but potentially there will be when people realise, you know, local authorities and then local politicians may then realise that something in their areas is under threat. That may then spur a negative reaction. But I mean, the Welsh government isn't just stopping the roads, and that's the positive thing. So they've got something else going in as well. So as they've done with the N4 and the South East Wales Transport Commission, they've also got a North Wales Transport Commission they're setting up now under Lord Burns as well, looking at what are the alternatives and what transport infrastructure needs to go in to deliver all the objectives that they've got around climate change and everything else. So hopefully that will help neutralise a lot of opposition. But elsewhere, where those commissions aren't being set up, then there might be small pockets of quite vociferous sort of antis. In terms of the English roads, because in England we are quite sort of behind the times, if you like, I think it's a very conservative thing. Conservatives have been very pro-road. They will remain very pro-road, certainly in the current guise, well, certainly with Grant Shapps there. Where are Labour? I mean, generally they've been very supportive when we've got them to ask questions, but they haven't been very vocal, and that's something that we do need to look at. And I think also encourage local groups to be, putting pressure on Labour to make more. I mean, it's, a lot of the metropolitan areas are equally enthusiastic about road building, even if they are more enthusiastic about public transport and active travel. They still do have, some of them quite negative responses to dumping roads. Manchester's got some very controversial road schemes, for example. So I think there's more to be done, and we've got to encourage and get more engagement with people who are opposing road schemes locally with the MPs, and that's as true in Conservative areas as well, because potentially those are the people who are going to more likely be able to change the sort of flavour of government, if you like, change what the government actually does.
I happen to be in Holland at the moment because that's where my partner lives. And they have massive networks of roads. For example, a few years ago, they put in a massive motorway to take the flowers away from Utrecht to get to the coast. And the fact they've got these big motorways means that they keep lorries and big transport out of town, cities, villages. And inside town, cities, villages, as you know, it's mostly walking, cycling, public transport. So I'm just curious about this, that if you build a decent road network around the country, as long as you have cycle routes alongside as well, of course, and you build railways, does it not keep traffic outside the towns, villages and cities, which we all would prefer? Thank you.
Well, it keeps some traffic, or a lot of traffic, out of towns and villages and settlements, but by and large, a lot of places have already got that road network. I think the problem is that when they build, certainly in this country, when they build a bypass, it comes with road expansion, so it increases the road's capacity. The centre of the town and village isn't reclaimed, it's just left as a free-for-all. Very occasionally you get some measures put in. I mean, Brighton was probably one of the few where with some very progressive officers at East Sussex at the time who went in and reclaimed a lot of road space for bus priority measures, that Brighton, has seen some beneficial effects from the bypass. It's suffered a lot from the bypass as well. There's a lot of noise in the national park area and a lot of destruction of green space and severance with the countryside. But undoubtedly, some of that heavier traffic has been kept out of the city. But in most places that doesn't happen, and even then, traffic in Brighton is still overwhelming. So I think it can work to a degree, but it has to be done in a very careful way. And if you look at the decision that the Welsh review took on the, apologies to anyone who's Welsh if I get this wrong, I think it's Llanbedra bypass that was recommended for refusal, and was, well, to stop work on it because it would just generate loads more traffic. It was being used to allow huge out of town development on not linked to an airport, but not on airport use for airport uses, as well as potentially encouraging more traffic. And they've gone for they've said to look at a package of measures to bring in better walking, cycling, public transport along the whole corridor first, and then only use the road as a last resort. And I think it's not just saying no roads, but it's actually saying use it as a last resort, and at a scale that is appropriate, because that's what goes wrong over here. I mean, the only thing about the Netherlands is they have still a very high level of car use. and they've had issues around nitrate deposition, which they've had to, be lowering speed limits. But actually, they have been taking some measures to address that. But we actually need to see. We haven't got the funding though overall to do everything. So it's a question of priorities. So we should be moving away from road building.
Chris, that was really welcome, and it's given me the kind of kick up the arse to push back a bit harder against road building projects in Greater Manchester, because you flagged Manchester directly, and I know I sit on one of the boards for Greater Manchester, and we get these papers coming across that saying, big development plans, spatial framework plans, they're carbon friendly because they've got a bus, but they're conveniently located just by motorway junction. It's a weird one, that one. So I'd really like to pick up with you on that, because I think probably ours is one little patch of the English landscape that needs to push back a bit harder. So thanks very much. That's really inspired me.
Yeah, sorry, I actually was hit by a Porsche this afternoon when I was going around Regent's Park. Minor, no damage to me, and interesting because he went into the mandatory cycle lane before the advanced stop reservoir. Anyway, I had a bit of a shout at him, and actually the talk we've had, Chris's talk, is I found it actually a bit depressing, really. I mean, it's like, I was really hoping for the court things to actually work and we'd get a victory. I mean, I'm just feeling a bit, thanks for all the work, and there's a lot going on and people are working hard, and you should give money to TAN because there's lots of other things that can push on, but it's sort of kind of like a bit of a depressing outlook, really, isn't it? I mean, I just want to ask him, in a couple of sentences, how do you feel, having had numerous years of activism and so on? What is your basic gut feeling about where we are and what's going on?
Yeah, Bob, I understand where you come from, and depends what day I'm on as to whether I'm feeling more positive or negative about these things. I think I'm feeling a bit more positive at the moment because we are doing more. I think I'm feeling more positive because of what's happening in Wales and what's happening in Scotland.
Yeah, it's a good, yeah.
And I think we do need to keep shining a light and keep shouting about those, because they are the way forward.
Yeah.
However flawed they might be, they are way ahead, streets ahead of where we are in England. I mean, I think, yes, I mean, like you, I would have loved the court challenge to have worked on RIS 2. You never know, we may succeed on the national policy statement, but we're not going away on challenging the roads. As I said, we've written now to grant SHAPs, and that may give us opportunity to about reopening RIS 2, because there's been so much delay that the funding is going out of sync with what they wanted to do. So there may be opportunities around that. But I think we just have to keep pushing. The climate is being taken more and more seriously. We've seen that within a lot of the examinations. The inspectors have been taking the questions around climate incredibly seriously, asking more questions. And it was on the A38 where the inspector effectively threw it back at grant SHAPs and said, I can't answer this. You need to look at the cumulative impact of carbon emissions across the whole of the roads programme and reassess this. And months and months later, we're still waiting for a decision on that, and many other schemes which have been delayed by, I think one of them's been delayed now 3 times, about a year or year and a half. So I'm quite positive that they're tripping over themselves at the moment in trying to find ways through. I'm not so naive to think that that's the end of road building, because I think they will find a way and go ahead and approve them, but there may be other ways we can still trip them up. But I think at the very least we should take comfort in the fact that we've stopped several and delayed them quite significantly as well. So and I think if more people can join in and do more, then hopefully we can increase that impact.
really have a question. It was just more of an observation on Ruth's point, which is something that's very worth looking into, is what the Dutch call sustainable safety, which is they don't let arterial traffic into their towns, so that when they build their networks, basically the low traffic neighborhood, or the LTN, is the basis of roads planning in the Netherlands. And what they call it is a system of road functions, where they have roads for local traffic, roads for arterial traffic, and the roads that connect the two. But yeah, they are actively managing traffic. They're not simply catering for traffic, and they're actively managing the kind of trips that can take place by motor vehicle in particular places in their towns. And it's very, I don't want to get into this, we don't have time here, but it's very worth looking into for anyone who's interested in how the Dutch system works.
It does.
As Chris knows, we kind of, myself and Louise are with XR Roads Rebellion, and we're trying to support TAN as much, amongst other things. And it seems it's like now is a sort of, it's all or nothing really. Along with LTNs on a local level, we want to get LTNs as wide as possible, citywide, townwide, borough-wide. And it is this massive sort of battle of battles, as well as the climate, which is still put on the back burner. We don't hear anything of it. BBC, blah blah blah. You'd think there was nothing to worry about. But just in terms of transport, it's as if there's this is something I think Brian Deegan may have mentioned. We can either go down the US route or the European route. And it is worrying that it looks as if we are following the US and just turning Britain into a massive racetrack, plugging EVs because they're going to be the source of revenue, even with road pricing, and oblivious to the extra embedded carbon and resources and so on and so on.
Post COP26, well, COP26 was all about EVs, and EVs being the panacea to kind of, you know, address climate change, and that's used as a justification to build more roads, and they're anticipating an increase of traffic on our roads, and therefore want to build roads. But so I just wondered what Chris had to say about setting car reduction use targets in the way that Scotland and Wales have done. They've each got 20% reduction, I think, by 2030, and that's not explicit, and that's not happened in England. And should we all be pushing for that? Because that could then underpin the change we want to see, which is increased funding for active travel and public transport.
Yeah, Chris, there's the Dutch approach, and any reflections on that? XR Roads and Stephen's reflection that, you know, are we going down the US approach of racetrack plus EVs? And Louise's question there about, you know, is it time for England to set car reduction targets?
In terms of managing the network, I think that's a really good point, and I think that's a really good point to feed into RIS3, for example, the Roads Investment Strategy 3 consultation, because we do need to get the government and DfT to start thinking differently as to how it manages the strategic roads network. It should be there for strategic journeys and not, you know, the thousands of local journeys that currently clog it up. So I think that's a good one to sort of try and feed into there. In terms of, you know, fighting LTNs and everything else and turning into a racetrack, I think we've got to encourage authorities of all levels, particularly local authorities, to do a lot more engagement. I think, you know, we've got to try and take people with us on this, and the more that they can understand and realise the benefits, as I'm sure a lot of you have already, you know, and probably said, then they will, you know, they will tend to go with them. And once they've got them, generally, most people want to keep them. They don't want traffic back. But yeah, I mean, there's a report from Transport for New Homes which has been looking at new developments, and it doesn't make, you know, read pretty reading. It does make pretty reading. It's basically, we are going down the way of the States, of these car-centred developments, cowpat developments as they call them, plonked in the middle of a green field with no access to services, where everyone's got to drive, and then, you know, supposedly being in a nice green area, they're then just full of tarmac because they've got to house all the cars. So there's no room left for green space or play areas or whatever it happens to be. So it is a worrying that even with changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, we are still rolling out these very car-centric developments, which are setting, they're concreting in car travel for future generations, and plenty of issues around that. In terms of the increase in EVs being used to justify road building, yes, that is a line that is taken. But even if you look at the Climate Change Committee, I mean, they are saying there needs to be some demand management. So although they are sort of at the moment to some extent accepting an element of traffic growth, they are not accepting the traffic growth that the DfT is predicting and using to justify all its road building. So I think we do need to we do need to sort of have a traffic reduction target in England. It's in 20% in Scotland. In Wales, it's I think slightly different. They've got modal shift targets. I think their absolute target reduction in car traffic is slightly lower. But we haven't got anything in England. We haven't even got a recognition that we need to have any traffic restraint in England at the moment. So we're sort of 2 stages behind, let alone 1 stage. Although having said that, England's economic heartland, the regional air transport subnational transport body or regional transport body that stretches from Swindon to Peterborough, does have a 5% reduction target for cars by 2030. And it's the only area that we're aware of that does that. And the Transport for the North area does have a carbon pathway that it's meant to be following, but it's not really, it's still got masses of road building in there. I don't think it really has quite, aligned the two up. So I think, yes, EVs are being used as an excuse. I think we still need to be pointing out that there's still lots of problems with them. There's still a huge amount of embodied energy in them, apart from resource issues linked to batteries at the moment, although that might change in the future. There still are car and road particulate issues, less so on the brakes because a lot of them have regenerative braking. And of course, they still work wonderfully in a traffic jam. So plenty of reasons for economically and efficiency and productivity not to have loads and loads of cars in urban areas. So I think there's still good arguments against EVs in those areas. Elsewhere, it's perhaps less strong. But I don't think there's a real argument to carry on road building just because we're having EVs, even though some people will be making that argument.
I've got Adam with a question. I'm just going to ask at this point one though, which is, I read today the report into where Greater Manchester's up to with the B network, and it made for quite depressing reading around public transport, basically due to how much it's been affected by COVID. And I think there's a lot that's not really, that's all still a bit hidden. It's all a bit of an untold story, how decimated public transport's been and the subsidies that are being needed. So my worry is that that's going to be used to justify the increase in roads. Is that something you're seeing, Chris?
I've barely had anyone contact us about buses for since I set up TAN. Had one person who had an ongoing issue, but in the last 3 months we've had quite a lot getting in touch because it is a serious issue. It almost seems like they are deliberately destroying the public transport because they are, and it's difficult to know where it is, because I think the DfT do get it. From what I've been told, the DfT do get it, but it's the Treasury which are refusing absolutely to continue any COVID funding beyond April. Now, the thing is, it's not quite so simple for public transport, because certainly bus services, you have to give quite a lot of notice if you're changing the service. So many providers are cutting the services now because they can't risk not having any subsidy come, in 10 weeks' time, or even less now. So, the real fear is that with the decimated public transport services, with the increase in sales in second-hand vehicles, that will lead to an increase in pressure for road space. Yes, that is a big worry, and I think that's why people do need to be shouting about what's happening with public transport, about the loss of the services, but also the ridiculous price hikes on the railways. I mean, you know, if a business wants to get trade, it normally slashes prices. It doesn't put them up.
Things I want to bring up is I don't know if the city region sustainable transport settlements have created any sort of impetus in that direction. I know the West of England one, each of the councils, I think Bristol set a 40% reduction in road miles driven by 2030. Baines is 24%. I think South Gloss is also around that time. And also Bath as the council has also committed to creating a circulation plan for the whole city, not just a certain, like I know Birmingham has gone into the centre, and I'm wondering if there's like a formula that we should be working towards, that if you, like this idea of a circulation plan using low traffic neighbourhoods to enforce it. And then, but I don't know if this is one of these, and using the net zero targets to kind of say, well, how else are you going to start reducing your road miles driven? And these are being set by officers. They aren't being set by politicians. They're basically saying, you've declared a climate emergency. If you want to hit net zero across this region, we need to do this amount of reduction in road miles driven. I'm wondering if that's an approach that we should be looking at.
I think it is. But it does need proper buy-in, because otherwise they're just going to be fantasy targets and not actually delivered on. If the politicians aren't 100% behind it, they're not going to see it through to actually deliver some of the awkward elements that might be needed in that package, because you can't just sweet talk your way to traffic reduction. It requires some demand management measures, which will require upsetting some people. Not the majority, hopefully, but it will upset some people. And if they become very, very noisy, then we've seen what that can do in terms of implementation. So
I was just going to say, I think the political language that's being played out in politics is very much that. It's whoever's in charge and proposing this. Suddenly, it makes no difference what other party is around is in opposition. They will oppose whatever they're doing just to win the next election, and that, I think, is problematic.
Yeah, and I think that's why it needs more engagement and more people getting involved with these issues. I think I'd love there was a silver bullet and a shortcut to this, but I think what we've seen over the last year or so sort of demonstrates that there has got to be more engagement and trying to bring people with us.
I came to be rather late, I must say, and so I've missed some of the wonderful logic that always permeates our discussions. But my concern from a design point of view is that many of us, many politicians can't understand a plan or a drawing. Full stop. They cannot understand. They cannot imagine what's happening. I was commenting recently, as I briefly put in the chat, with a group doing some testing work on National Model Design Code. And we were bemoaning various layouts. I was bemoaning Crab Hill in Wantage in Oxfordshire, which has got a massive peripheral road and not quite joined up centre, and not joined up, no roads joined up to existing roads. We know how to reduce traffic, which is to have connected Victorian shaped cities. Phil Jones, I then put in some hope that Manual for Streets 3 might rescue us from some of this. And Phil Jones's comment, who's part of the team, was Manual for Streets 3 can't fix the underlying problem. We privatise the making of towns and cities. And that's from a man who wrote the last one. We have privatised the making of towns and cities. So we're going down the US road because lots of engineers think that's good, and lots of housing developers think it's good. Full stop. We are, I wouldn't be rude enough to say stuffed, but it's very disappointing. It's very, very, very disheartening. Does anyone know, apart from Panbury, anywhere that's been built that reduces the need to use a car? Full stop, over and out.
I want to say thanks to Chris for that presentation and answering all those questions. I mean, I was just kind of blown away by just the amount of work that must have gone into all those legal challenges and the amount of work that you and what sounds like a small band of people have been doing on that. So like huge thanks to all of you on that. Therefore, it just leaves me to hand to Ruth for the last word, and we'll see you back on the 1st of March or whenever you like.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everybody. Really, really good session. Several things in the chat that I've just clocked. Somebody's put, is there any doctor's practices that prescribe cycling, walking? There is, and I can't remember which ones, but there definitely are. And there's also an organisation that is doing remedial cycling for people who've had very severe mental breakdowns following any kind of accident. And that was on Facebook today, but I can't remember. I'm so sorry, but there are these things around, which is fantastic. I'm in Holland, as you may have discovered, and we cycled 7 miles to Rotterdam and 7 miles back in torrential rain, headwinds, all on protected cycle spaces. And we cycled past a school that had the most extraordinary bike racks. I did send a picture to Mark Strong. I don't know how to add it. But my point is that we were continuous from one sort of borough to another. And that is the problem. Someone else talked about that, which is if it's borough by borough, town by town, city by city, we're never going to get this continuous linked up thing. And that's something that Active Travel England need to focus on. You know, even getting from Chiswick to Richmond is going through 3 boroughs. So it is key to get people to cycle continuously, walk continuously, because as we know, if there's less cars, more cycling, it's nicer for walking and less noise. So we need Active Travel England really on so we can talk to them. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice rest of half term and see you all 2 weeks' time. Bye.